Hello Grindersville, this is CodeRed Rules, and today I'm going to be going over a short with you on how to play against a couple Maniacs real quick. Or maybe one Maniac, one Fish. There was a question that was brought to me that when you guys are, I don't know, I'm sure this is a common problem where you've got a big Maniac on the table. Maybe he's like a 50-30, he's raising and playing a lot of hands. And you might also possibly have like a pretty passive guy too, like a 35-0 or along those lines, where both of them like to play a lot of hands and none of them like to fold. So the question is, like, do you want to tighten up and just try and play for the nuts for them, or do you want to, loosen up, or do you want to like just play your normal game? Well, the first thing to think about is, what are their stack sizes like? If they have full stacks, then that's what we're talking about today. If they don't have full stacks, if they have like half stacks or less, then they're not exactly that profitable to play against, because the shorter their stacks are, almost the more maniacal their play can be and almost be defendable and not as big a mistake. That's especially true in like in a heads-up context, where if someone's like really aggro and 20 big blinds, it's really hard to play against. On the other hand, alright, if they are full stacked, then that's who we want to be playing against, and that's our ideal opponents to play against. Alright, let's talk about position too. If they have position on us, and they're going to be in position on us, then it's going to be really hard to play, and again, it makes it a horrible spot for us to be in, to the point where a Maniac who's on your left isn't that great of a table, and you should almost be looking to either switch seats at that table if you're playing live, or you're able to do maybe like someone's seats opens up on the opposite side of him, and you can switch tables there. I've done that many times before, where you got this Maniac on your left, and an open seat opens up on his left, and you just kind of get up and sit down in his seat. Now, granted, it's not necessarily easy to do, but if you're paying attention, you can get to that. Otherwise, in both scenarios, if they're not full stacked, or if they're not even, at least 3/4 stacked, and if they have position on you, then you should possibly look for other tables. Okay, but so that introduction's out of the way. Should you be tightened up, or should you be playing more hands? And I think common sense would tell you that you want to tighten up, right? Where you got someone who's in there playing a lot of hands. You don't need to be playing a lot of marginal hands there, so tighten up. And I think that's entirely wrong. Hopefully, you guys weren't thinking that. Your goal should be to play the maximum number of hands you possibly can against players who are less skilled than you. And you have an edge against your opponents, and you can maximize that edge by just playing a lot more hands than them profitably. And that especially is true like when you have position on them, when you have a good hand. So I'm not telling you guys to like go ahead and call offsuit connectors there pre-flop against them, but suited connectors for sure. Pocket pairs, any Broadway card. These guys are, if someone's raising up a hand like Queen Deuce, okay, Queen Deuce suited or whatever, then Queen 10 suited is the nuts against his hand range. And so let's go ahead and real quick. So let's say a 50-30 raises, and whether someone else is in the pot or not. If someone else is in the pot, then for sure you're going to be playing like any Broadway, any pair. A lot of these suited connectors here, you're just going to be calling if someone else is in the pot already, and you're not even going to be worried about it. You're going to stay away from these offsuit aces, and even some of these lower suited aces, unless it's really multi-way and you have the button, then you can maybe play these profitably. But keep in mind that when we're really multi-way, we're playing against both people's ranges. When we're heads up against the fish, you can maybe throw away, against the Maniac, throw away a couple of these lower suited connectors and then add in a couple of the higher suited aces. The great thing about these suited connectors is that they flop 2 pairs and nice draws, and your opponent, if he does have a real hand like aces, king, pretty much any top pair, he's going to feel like he's the nuts with that hand, and you can be able to stack him pretty easily. The whole trick is to not overplay your own pair post-flop. So let's say you do have a hand like 8-7 suited and you flop 8 high. Alright, 8, that's like 8-4 deuce rainbow. Are you willing to stack off post-flop with your 8? I would say no, your goal is not stack off, but on the other hand, you probably are ahead of his hand range. So this is all going to come down to how your opponent plays post flop. If he's the kind of guy who just bets, then you might have to call down 3 streets. In fact, if he does just bet like every single time, then be more than happy to just call down 3 streets. Now, should you be raising him at any point because he likes to bet a lot? And I would argue no, just because raising is an entirely different action than calling, right? So raising, you force him to make the call with whatever he has, and he has to have a made hand to call, or you think he has to have a made hand to call. Alright, so these are the hands minimum that I would be playing against the Maniac. Now, let's say like somebody limps in, right? And this call comes down to isolating it. Like, let's say you're playing against a 35 passive, the passive fish or whatever, and hopefully you have position on him. If you don't have position on him, it's not that big of a deal as long as he folds to c-bets. If he doesn't like to fold post flop and he's passive and he has position on you, I would leave the table. But alright, so you have position on him. He limps in. Alright, what should you be doing? Well, you're going to want to be raising up any Broadway here to isolate. That's going to be a given, as well as ace 9 suited, ace 8 suited, ace 7 suited. This is assuming that it's heads up. You can probably also throw in ace 9 and ace 8 too, and then heads up pot. If you're multi-way, alright, and he's limped in, somebody else is limped in, you can throw in ace 2s through ace 6 as limping. You could isolate those two if you want, but I usually like to limp in those hands and play them small pots. These little suited kings and suited queens that are kind of marginal, you can limp in those, especially if you're on the button. I mean, like I said, your goal is to play a lot of hands against this guy. And when you have an edge against your opponent, you can play a lot of hands. In fact, you probably should be raising up king 9 and queen 9 against him. And start lumping in these other really marginal hands. Hands like that don't need to be raised up and playing a small pot. And they do really well in high SPR situations, right? Same thing with like 2s through 6s. Some people will isolate those as well. And if you're comfortable doing that, then by all means. I mean, I'm sure you have the best hand at this point. Sometimes it just plays easier post flop by just limping in and playing for set value. So that's probably what I would do. I would stay away in both cases, staying away from like offsuit cards. So stay away from like any kind of this range of hands. So I've got the 4 corners here. King 9 to king deuce, 10 9 to 3 deuce. Right, anywhere up in that hand range is just going to be garbage hands to play. Consequently, right, ace 9 to ace deuce is more defendable, right? Ace 9 and ace 8 are still pretty strong hands. Ace 7's marginal. Ace 2 to ace 6 is pretty garbage. So I would dump those. On the suited connectors kind of hands, alright, any ace suited is pretty much open game. The marginal kings we have here are going to look something like, let's see, I think something like this. I think this little trapezoid here that doesn't really work out, but suited aces are open games. King 7 suited. All these hands here you can defend either by isolating or limping in behind. The more marginally a hand is, say, like Jack 7 suited, I almost like you isolating it up rather than limping it behind. Trying to get it heads up with this hand is going to be probably going to show more of a profit for you than, say, like lumping it in 5-way and trying to play a pot that way. Alright? As compared to a hand like Jack 10 suited, ideally, or let's say like 10-9 suited, right? We could limp that in behind and play a 5-way pot with that much easier than we could, say, like 10-7 suited. It's kind of the reverse aspect where we can very easily call. Well, actually, no, it's not reverse. It's pretty normal how we normally talk, right? And when I talk about playing in 3-bet pots, we have a range that we're willing to call with. We have a range we're willing to 3-bet for value, and we have a range that we're willing to raise as a bluff. Okay. Same thing goes for when we're limping in behind or when we're isolating. We have a range here that we're willing to raise for value. Okay. Let's say this. I don't know. We have a range that we're willing to bluff. All right, and that's going to be something like this. And then we also have the range that we're willing to just call with, because they're strong enough that we can call. And it's going to be just like this. Alright, so guys, hopefully you guys have taken some away from this. Granted, it was short here, and if you guys have any questions, please feel free to ask. Thank you guys, and good luck at the tables.